So then, Turkey's president has warned Damascus against further provocations in Syria's last rebel-held territory. Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he will strike against government forces anywhere if they target Turkish troops in Idlib province. He's also demanding Syrian forces be pushed back beyond Turkish observation posts by the end of February.
These attacks are directly targeting our soldiers and directly targeting Turkey. There is no more time for talk. We have to look at the realities on the field and act. By the end of February, the regime must be pushed behind our observation points. Whatever is needed on the ground or in the air, we are not going to have any hesitation, and we are going to act on it.
Well, Syrian government forces have killed 15 Turkish soldiers in Idlib in recent days, and much of the fighting in the past week has focused on the M5 highway, which is a main trade route that links Damascus with Aleppo. Government forces are now fully in control of that crucial highway. While the fighting has triggered a humanitarian crisis, it's displaced nearly 700,000 people. Russia is blaming the escalation on Turkey, saying the presence of their troops in Idlib is making the situation worse.
The reasons for the current deterioration that we are witnessing in Idlib is Turkey's continued failure to fulfill its obligation under the Sochi Memorandum and Ankara's transfer of units of the so-called moderate armed opposition to northeastern Syria.
Well, let's hear now from our reporter Sinem Kosioglu, who's in the town of Bab al-Hawa in Syria, and she explains the positions held by both Syrian and Turkish forces in the area.
The Syrian government is first bombarding the areas and pushing the civilians out of the areas and then entering those villages. And it seems they are eager to continue from south to the north and take over a full control inside Idlib, in the Idlib de-escalation zone, despite a multilateral agreement that it should be a de-conflict zone, it should be a de-armed area, and the civilians shall be able to freely move here. So given the situation, given the rapid advance by the Syrian government and the very harsh weather conditions, there is a humanitarian crisis on the ground, which has been there actually for many years. There are at least 4 million people right behind Turkish borders in Idlib, and at least 1 million are by the border in Atma area. And there is not enough space left for any more civilians. And as the Syrian government offensives continue, there are more and more people displaced every day. And despite all these, this is a proxy war, the military experts say, and both the Syrian government and the Turkish government are devoted to continue their reinforcements for their military bases. Of course, still it is unknown whether this is going to be a direct war, a bilateral war between Ankara and Damascus, or will they end up with a diplomatic solution?
Let's take this on. Let's speak to our senior political analyst, Marwan Bashar, who joins us now from London. Marwan, Russia pointing the finger firmly at Turkey. Erdogan is defiant. Where is this heading?
It sounded to me like that we are approaching a moment of truth. Because on the one hand, the Syrian regime is advancing in Idlib and even in the areas of Aleppo with a huge, terrible human cost to Syrians. As your report said, several hundred, almost 700,000 new refugees in the last 10 weeks. And clearly the Turks being hurt, humiliated, but also their soldiers killed, are lashing out. And the president of Turkey talking to parliament about a national emergency of sort and basically issuing ultimatum to the Syrian regime means either the Syrian regime is going to have to back out or Turkey is going to have to respond. Either way, we are in the midst of paralysis. And to be honest, there are far more questions about what's going on and the players in Syria than there are answers at this point.
Would the Syrian regime back out, and how does Russia fit into all of this?
Well, that takes me back to your original question. I mean, is the Syrian regime playing games with Moscow and Ankara, or is Russia playing games with Syria and Turkey? If the puppet master is Putin, and they're the one that's pushing the regime from behind the scene, then clearly Moscow is interested in the regime continuing his aggressive or its aggressive attacks on the north, regardless of the human cost and regardless of Turkey's humiliation. That could take us into a whole new ball game, because Turkey is not about to let the Syrian regime take control of all over northern Syria at a huge human cost, because there is also the question of millions of refugees that have already fled to Turkey, and several 100,000 might also be crossing borders unless Turkey takes charge of that part. But that actually takes me to another point, Nick, quickly, which is something got to give on the question of Idlib, because it cannot continue to be the bleeding wound of Syria when everyone knows that some arrangement has to take place, and that this cannot just continue like an open wound, open-endedly. In the end of the day, Ankara and Moscow have to reach an agreement about who's acting in Idlib and whether Turkey should, at the end of the day, take over the province, disarm it, in order for the Syrians to be at last living in some sort of safety.
So if you look at the players, Syria itself, Turkey, Russia, and then there is the United States. What about them?
Well, clearly the United States, as we all know, has detached itself with President Trump pulling its troops out. But now we see reports, we hear reports about the special envoy, James Jeffrey, meeting with the Turks and voicing American support to Turkey. That certainly will give the Turkish presidency some leverage, if you will, with Russia, because at the end of the day, America's role remains important, even if there isn't that many forces there. We also know of a skirmish between the American forces and the Syrian regime. That means Americans are really interested in supporting the Turks. Europeans, on the other hand, I mean, I don't want to use words like pathetic, but certainly their response has been so evasive and so weak, when Europe is far more affected by what goes on in Syria than the United States. Europe has more leverage, is more proximate, and should be not only reacting to what Moscow and Ankara are doing, but should be proactive, because it continues to complain about the issue of refugees, of instability on its borders, but it's not doing enough, neither for the humanitarian catastrophe called Syria, nor for the strategic calculus that is taking place on the ground today.
All right, Marwan, thanks very much indeed. Marwan Bashar there, talking to us from London.